I'm Renee Ritchie, and this is Vector. This is actually the first Vector video that I am filming all by myself, that I set up all by myself, and that I'm doing the audio for all by myself. So if I got anything wrong, just let me know in the comments, and I will work as hard as possible to make it as good as possible, as fast as possible. And actually, this is the second video because the first one went terribly wrong. Anyway, so yesterday I put up my HomePod, not a review because HomePod is not available in Canada. So I looked at it more from an analyst point of view than a gadget reviewer point of view. But I did the text, the podcast, and the video, and then I said, hashtag AMA, ask me anything. And boy, did you ask me a ton of stuff. So I'm just gonna go through some of the questions and give you the best answers I possibly can. So first one, Gavin, when did you sleep? That's not a real question, I didn't, but that's not a real question. Walt Mankowski, at Walt_man. Can you use HomePod as a speaker for something you're watching on an Apple TV? Yes, absolutely, but with a caveat. There's no dedicated Apple TV mode. There's no dedicated sound bar mode. You can't say, make this HomePod an inextricable part of your Apple TV and just ignore everything else and make it a spectacular home theater system. You can't do that. But what you can do is AirPlay from your Apple TV to your HomePod. And I've been doing that all week, and it's worked really well because AirPlay sort of sticks to the Apple TV. If you try to AirPlay from something else, if you try to play Apple Music or something natively, you will lose that connection and you have to reset it. But it's literally just swipe down, swipe across a few times, click a button, and you're there. I don't find it any more onerous than changing HDMI inputs or sound inputs on a receiver, anything like that. So it's not perfect. I would think carefully before making it your main Apple TV speaker because it won't work with anything else you have hooked up to your television. But if all you want to do is listen to Apple TV over the HomePod, absolutely can do that. Next question from Dave Podnar, Prof Pod. If you aren't a high-end music listener and listen to a podcast, this seems like overkill for the price. Those looking for an Echo or Google Home competitor may be disappointed. Is that a good reading of the product? Well, yes and no. So I am not an audiophile. I've said this before. From the early days, from my Trio 600, 650, 680, Palm Pro, all on my early iPhones, I listened to podcasts over the microphone like an animal, and people would make fun of me, but it really didn't bother me. I just wanted to hear the information. I didn't really care about the sound quality. But it's really much better listening to them on HomePod. I let the bad quality win because it was more convenient at the time, but now I can have good quality and convenience, and that beats absolutely everything. And Apple really didn't make this to be an Amazon Alexa or Google Home competitor. Those companies wanted to put their AI into your house, and so they made a very low-cost, data-subsidized device for doing that really has a poor speaker and is only there to take and ingest commands and provide services. Apple went from the completely opposite way. Those devices had a speaker because they had to in order to work. Apple wanted to make a great speaker, and when they tried to figure out what was the best interface for that, Siri was the obvious answer. And it really depends what you need. If all you want is a cheap data-subsidized home assistant, then by all means, go for a Google Home or an Amazon Echo. But if you want a really great speaker, HomePod is currently the best device for that. Stuart Brannigan, at S. Brannigan. This is also a popular question. I am out and listening to Apple Music on my phone, and someone at home listens to HomePod. Will it pause mine? Can you listen to music in more than one place? And yeah, you absolutely can. And some people will say, well, of course. But if you have any knowledge of the music industry, you know that they want to make you pay for every time you listen to every song in every way imaginable. But what Apple's done with HomePod is it's completely separate from the device and the simultaneous streaming limits of Apple Music. So if you take your iPhone and you set up 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 HomePods at home, you can listen to Apple Music on all of them. They do not count against your device limit. And if you leave the home, anybody who is still at home can listen to any and all of those HomePods, and you can still listen to Apple Music on your iPhone. They absolutely do not affect each other, and I think that is really cool. Lee Webb, Macanology, wants to know, does HomePod work out where you are in the room? Surely that matters, doesn't it? Well, no, it is the opposite of that. It doesn't care where you are in the room. It wants to make sure that you have a great listening experience no matter where you are, because you are often not singular. There are often multiple people in a room, and if they tried to beam music just into your ear holes, that wouldn't be great for anybody else in the room. So what they do is make sure they measure the room, they create an acoustical model of the room, and then they fill the room with as much sound as possible. And Jim Dalrymple, who's the opposite of me, who is an audiophile, who understands music and speakers to a deep level and cares a lot about them, we walked around the demo room at WWDC and we could not find any dead spots. It's better when you're right next to the speaker and it starts to fade away as you get really far from the speaker. But all through the room, there was really rich, really full music. So it doesn't have to worry about where you are in the room. It just makes it sound great wherever you are in the room. Another question from Lee Webb, Twofer. If HomePod works through AirPlay, can I stream Spotify through it or anything else for that matter? You absolutely can. Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, iTunes Music, and iCloud Music Library are all native on HomePod. Those are what you can have full control over with Siri. But anything else on your iPhone, on your iPad, on your Mac, you can, on your Apple TV, you can AirPlay it straight to HomePod, and you can still use Siri to start or stop it, or you can ask questions while it's playing those music, and it'll duck the audio for a minute, answer the question, or perform the command, and then go right back to playing the music. So as long as you have your iOS device near you, you can stream anything from any app absolutely to HomePod. Marcus, TeddyDC202 wants to know, how does HomePod play with the iMac? How would it serve as wireless speakers for your home computer? And this is identical to Apple TV. There's no dedicated PC speaker mode for it, but you can AirPlay from your iMac or any Mac, MacBook Pro, MacBook, anything, to HomePod the same way you would from an Apple TV or from an iPhone or anything else. And that AirPlay signal will stick until you AirPlay from something else or you play something natively that breaks it. And then you just got to go back up, click on the little speaker sources icon, pick your HomePod again, and the audio goes right back to playing. Soulfully wants to know, is the upcoming update stereo or not? Reviewers are all over the place with this. And there's been a lot of confusion about the terms mono and stereo. People have started to assume that mono means single channel audio and that stereo means multi-channel, typically left-right audio. And fair enough. When Apple uses those terms, they're referring to one HomePod or two HomePods, two audio sources. There's a difference in the audio signal, the audio source coming in and the actual sound coming out. So what Apple means is when you have one HomePod, it's still going to take all that information. It'll take mono, it'll take stereo, and if it has a stereo source, it'll use that to inform the soundstage it's building. So it'll push vocals out through the front, and it'll push ambience and left and right channel information throughout the room, and it'll absolutely use that data. But if it has two HomePods, if they're paired, it'll have two sources, so it can provide a better soundstage in the room, a fuller sound, a richer sound, because it has two outputs now, not left and right, but just two outputs to better make the model. And if you have a bigger room, because it has those two outputs, it can even better fill that room. It can make a bigger, not just a better, but a bigger sound stage. So that's what Apple means by a single speaker versus two speakers. It's not mono and stereo the way you have left and right in AirPods, for example. It's just one computational audio device versus two computational audio devices in your room. And we're going to have to change the way we define a lot of these outputs, a lot of mono and stereo, 2.1, 5.1. None of that really matters anymore in a computational audio room. And we have to figure out how to talk about that so people understand it, because there's just been so much confusion. Dan Martin, another really popular question, how does HomePod work in Canada? Because obviously I'm using it in Canada, and it works fine. There are a few limitations. For example, if you have your HomePod using a Canadian or a non-US, non-UK, non-Australian iTunes account, you won't get things like Daily Brief, because those are specific to a location. Apple has set up specific sources to provide news information or sports information to those regions, and those don't exist in Canada or France or any other country, but your account will still work. I've not run into any other problems. Maybe you will, maybe you'll find things I haven't, but so far it's just worked for me. Justin Lin wants to know, when I compared it to Sonos, when Apple did the Pepsi Challenge, which Sonos were they comparing it against? So the first time, back at WWDC in June of last year, it was against the Play 3, and I've owned a pair of Play 3s for, 5 or more years. When they did it a couple of weeks ago, it was against the Sonos One. Sonos One sounded like the Sonos 3 for me. HomePod sounded better than both of them, but Sonos and HomePod both sounded way better than Google Max and Amazon Echo and the new version of the Amazon Echo. So it was against the Play 3 and then the Sonos One. Jason Eccles wants to know, if my phone or watch is closer to me, which picks up Siri? I don't want my watch telling my phone to play music or vice versa. And this is a question I've also gotten a lot. So what happens is, whenever you have Siri-capable devices in this proximity to each other, they create a special Bluetooth network. And then when you issue a command, when you say the command words, all of them wake up and immediately try to start answering whatever you ask them or performing whatever command you ask them. And that's so that there's zero latency, so that there's no delay, so you get a response as quickly as possible. Then as they're trying to figure out their response, they communicate with each other and they vote on which device should answer you, which one is the best one to answer you. So for example, if you're lifting your wrist up, it probably means you're trying to talk to your Apple Watch. If you're just saying the command out loud, HomePod is going to pick up because it has much better mics and is much more capable of understanding you. If you're doing a secure command for HomeKit, For example, HomePod can lock doors, but it can't unlock them because they don't want someone putting their head in the window and yelling, "Unlock your door," while their friend rushes into your house. It'll try to defer that to an iPhone or an iPad. And that works some of the time. I haven't got it to work all of the time, but best case scenario, the best device that is most capable of responding to you should win and respond to you under any given circumstance. Linda VT asks, I transfer my audiobooks to iTunes and then onto my iPhone. Can I play them through HomePod? Can I control start, stop, and pause them? So again, this is one of those things where you're going to have to AirPlay. There's no built-in support for Audible books until Apple creates SiriKit for audio and the Audible app hooks into it, or until Audible allows Apple to include audiobooks in iCloud Music Library. You're going to have to AirPlay them either from your iPhone or from your computer. But once you do that, you can't tell Siri to just start playing a book, but once you start AirPlaying the book, you can say start and stop and all the basic commands. Bella B wants to know, when will HomePod be available in Canada or any other country? Very popular question again. And the answer is it's available in the UK, the US, and Australia at launch. Apple's already said that Germany and I believe France are coming this spring, but basically every country is a little bit different. They have different languages, different language requirements, different accents. Sometimes there's different requirements or licensing for content or partnership deals, or there's just differences in metadata. And Apple wants to make sure it accounts for all of those things before it adds another country so that when you get it, it has the best experience possible. Pulin Kathari wants to know, I'm an Apple Music subscriber. Is the only way to initiate music playback by asking Siri to do it? Will there be no method via Apple Music app on the iPhone to choose something and then have it play on the HomePod other than AirPlay? Another really popular question. Also with the Apple Watch, can you use your iPhone or your Apple Watch as a remote control? And the answer is, in some ways, not in every way. You can't use it to initiate music. You can't pick something on your iPhone and then hand it off and then tell HomePod to start playing it. You can control it when something is playing. So for example, if I say, hey Siri, play Nascin Dormo.
Okay, playing Torrendo, Act 3, Nascin Dorma.
So once the music is playing, I can pull down Control Center, I can pop up the music widget, and then it'll show me what's playing on all these devices. I can choose my HomePod, I can pause it, I can play it. So if I don't want to use Siri, I can control it through my iPhone, but I can't initiate playback. That has to be done on the HomePod using Siri. Jason, J. Fournier wants to know, can you connect other audio sources to it? For instance, terrestrial radio, PC audio, or non-Apple TV television audio. So if you mean through a line-in, a 3.5 millimeter audio jack, no. There is no hardware line-in connection. Apple is all in on this wireless. It wants to drive wireless. It wants to make the wireless future a reality. And yeah, that sucks for people who aren't quite there yet, or services or gear that aren't quite there yet. But if you do have an app or a website for your radio station, or for any other audio source, you can AirPlay it. So again, AirPlay is the default answer to anything that's not Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, iTunes Music, or iCloud Music Library. Peter McCabe wants to know, will HomePod work with an Apple ID, Apple Music from a non-release country? I'm right now using it with a Canadian Apple ID. So yes, again, you might have some issues when it comes to metadata or the type of content, because sometimes different regions have different content available. Well, I haven't run into any of those yet, but it's possible. But yes, it works. David wants to know, I would like to know if a string of commands can be used to Siri, such as play spa radio for 30 minutes at 30% volume, or does each command need to be said separately? Yeah, I've sometimes had two commands work that are strung together, not always, not often even, once in a while, and I don't know what the magic formula, if there's special syntax or certain commands that will string together and others that won't. Most of the time it's only a single command. So for example, if I say, hey Siri, turn the lights red 100%.
Sorry, that feature is not supported by your lights.
But if I say, hey Siri, turn the lights red. Hey Siri, turn the lights red.
Done.
Hey Siri, turn the lights 50%.
Got it.
Hey Siri, turn the lights white 100%.
Sorry, that feature is not supported by your lights.
Hey Siri, turn the lights 100% white.
Sorry, that feature is not supported by your lights.
Hey Siri, turn the lights white.
Got it.
Hey Siri, turn the lights 80%.
Okay.
So for right now, one command at a time. I hope Apple actually increases it to multiple commands. That'd be really good. Soulless PJ wants to know, hey Renee, did you experiment with the sound, putting it in different places, e.g. near the corner wall versus a shelf, under or behind your TV? You mentioned it sounds amazing wherever it is, but just curious how the sound signature changes. So I did. I put it in the corner, I put it in a bookshelf, I put it on a table, I put it in the middle of the room, I put it on the sofa. I tried it in as many places as I could. And what happens is, when it's in the middle of the room, it just uses those 7 tweeters to create a 360-degree soundstage, and it will do left and right and ambient and all that as best as it can, but it's almost like walking around live musicians. Where the music is, it is. So if you're on one side or the other, it will sound slightly different depending on where the different sounds are being placed, but it sounds good throughout the room. When it's in the corner or against the wall, it will bounce, it'll echo off the wall to provide more spatial range. So it still sounds good. I'm not an audiophile, so maybe other people can pick up on the subtle differences of complete 360 versus bounce sound stages, but to me, it just sounds good no matter where it is. Ben Guthrie wants to know, is this a product you will actually use beyond this review as a main speaker? Yeah, absolutely, and that wasn't a given. There are a lot of Apple products I don't use, like I don't use an iPod Touch anymore, I just don't need to. And HomePod I sort of thought might be like that, like an accessory that I didn't really need because I'm all in on Sonos. But it just sounds better than Sonos, and me, a non-audiophile, just a regular listening type person, it sounded good enough, better enough to me that I kind of want it. And with AirPlay 2, I'll be able to mix and match different AirPlay 2 speakers, including Sonos, if they deliver the support they promised for it. But I kind of prefer to listen to the HomePod now, so I'm absolutely going to keep using it. And there's something about ambient Siri. I'm using Siri way more than I did. And I use Siri a lot. I've spoken about this before. I use Siri to control all the HomeKit stuff. I often dictate notes. When I'm in the car, I use Siri because you can't look at your phone, so I have my phone down next to me, and I'll tell Siri to read me messages, to send messages, to get directions, to figure out how far away I am. If I want to tell a friend, I say, Siri, how far am I from a friend that I have, and find my friends, and it'll say, 2 kilometers or 5 minutes or something, and I'll know all of that, and I can get a vast amount of information. But now that I'm just walking around, ambling around, asking Siri for everything from the weather to general information, I'm typing, I'm writing articles, I'm asking it how to spell words, I'm asking it for the meaning of words, and I never have to take my hands off what I'm doing. I don't have to switch windows or switch apps. I don't have to change context. And the human brain is horrible at changing context. It's why you forget things when you move from one room to another. So the more that I can concentrate on what I'm doing and use Siri as sort of this ambient intelligence, the more productive I'm being. And using Siri on HomePod has started me using Siri more often on my other devices. And because Siri is on these devices, it's not just on an Amazon Echo in my home or just on my phone. It's everywhere. It feels like one continuous presence. And yes, I want Apple to make Siri consistent across devices. I want Apple to make Siri a mesh intelligence that exists beyond the devices but is manifested in all of them. And I want Apple to make a Siri OS. But I'm getting closer and closer with all of these devices. And I find I'm using Siri a lot more now. And I'm absolutely going to use HomePod a lot. Frank Fuentes wants to know, any idea how a household with multiple iCloud accounts should use the HomePod? Should you create a separate iCloud account just to use for HomePod? Should you use one person's iCloud account rather than another? For me, I would just recommend using one iCloud ID, yours or the other person's or whatever. What I would recommend doing, though, is going into the Home app and going into your settings. See, right now, use listening history is on. That means whatever I ask HomePod to play, that'll inform Siri's music intelligence and it'll do for you and recommendations and more like this. When you have multiple people, you can sort of poison that machine learning, and maybe, for example, when I asked it to play music because my godkids were playing with it, I got the Mario soundtrack, which is Super Mario soundtrack, which is awesome, but it's not something that I would normally play all the time. So you just turn that off, and then whatever you listen to on your phone, your iPad, your Apple Watch, that will inform Siri's music intelligence about you, but the HomePod won't, and that's just better for a multi-user environment. PDG wants to know, can you correct out-of-sync audio from an Apple TV video when you AirPlay it to the HomePod, or does it just work? It just works. I've been using it all week. It has been perfectly in sync. I think the Apple TV team, the AirPlay team, and the HomePod team deserve a lot of credit for nailing that. My mom has a Samsung television connected to a Samsung cable box over HDMI, and it is often not in sync, and this has just been rock solid for me. So yeah, that part just works. Brett Barbie wants to know, does HomePod support only one timer at a time? Does it support multiple alarms with the ability to label each alarm? He's thinking of something like 8 minutes for pasta, 15 minutes for potatoes. Yes, it's not a HomePod thing. Apple has never supported multiple timers, not on iPhone, not on iPad. It just doesn't do it, which is why there are apps like Due Out, which provide that functionality. And it's something Apple absolutely has to add, because when you set a timer, you want to be able to ask how much time is left on that timer. I don't want to just know that there's 10 minutes till my cookies. I want to know how much time is left, so I need to check the cookies because I'm anxious about, I want my cookies. So you can set multiple reminders, you can label reminders, you can set multiple alarms. Hey Siri, remind me to check the cookies in 10 minutes.
Okay, I added check the cookies to the reminders.
Hey Siri,
in 10 minutes.
Hey Siri, remind me to check the steak in 3 minutes.
Okay, I added check the steak and 3 minutes to the reminders.
Hey Siri, set an alarm for me to publish the podcast in 3 hours.
Your publish the podcast alarm set for 9:05 p.m.
So that all works, but it would be great if timers worked as well. Have you played this is from Paul Sonoff, have you played the HomePod outside yet? What's your opinion of it? It is like minus a million degrees outside, so I have not taken it outside, but it would be the same as putting it in a room without any walls, and that means it will sound really great near it, and as you get further away, it'll sort of fade off, and maybe you want to consider multiple pairs for there, but it should be fine on like your deck or anything like that. I'm eager to try it if we ever leave Hoth and return to our summer Dagobah-like state. One of the questions I got a lot is whether Apple's going to provide software updates for HomePod, and they've already said that they will. For example, AirPlay 2 is coming later this year, but things like if they add SiriKit for audio, or they add a computational equalizer to it, how will that work? So that all happens in the Home app. If you go to the Home app and you go to the Home section, and counterintuitively, you tap on what looks like the location arrow in Maps, but it's actually the Add Home button, and then you have a bunch of features here, including software update, and that's where updates for your HomePod live. And you may have also seen that right here you have allow speaker access so that you can prevent people from airplaying to your HomePod if you don't want them to. You can let everyone do it, of course, but you can also choose anyone on the same network. And that means that you either had to have given them or provided them or shared with them your Wi-Fi password, put them on your network in order to access it. Or you can choose only people sharing this home. So if you've shared your home with your family members or your very close friends in HomeKit, then they can have access to it. And you can also just tap on require a password. And in that case, it generates a new password every time. So you can just share it for a party, for example. And you can even create your own passcode if you want to. And then people can use it and you can change it. So those are a lot of the questions I've gotten so far. If you still have questions about HomePod or anything else, at Rene Ritchie on Twitter. I want to thank you so much for listening, so much for subscribing. This is Vector. Hey YouTube, I'm Rene Ritchie. Thank you so much for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed. Do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, and that way even more digital assistants will get their wings.